Climate Change International Legal Regime. Introduction. Let's get started. Learning objectives. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to summarize the causes and effects of climate change, describe the UNFCCC's origins and negotiation process. Introduction. During recent years, scientists have collected evidence of changes in temperature, rainfall, and other weather variables. Let's click the buttons to learn more about the collected data, and I've done this for you. This data suggests that over the period 1880 to 2012, the average world temperature increased by 0.85 degrees Celsius. The data also demonstrates an increase in the quantity of greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide, in the atmosphere due to human activity. Scientists estimate that the global average surface temperature could rise to 4.8 degrees Celsius over the next 100 years. This means that even if emissions from human activities were to stop immediately, the effects of the emissions already accumulated may persist for centuries. The greenhouse effect. 1. The Earth's climate is affected by the interaction of radiation from the Sun and the Earth's atmosphere. The atmosphere consists of nitrogen and oxygen, and many natural greenhouse gases including carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, ozone gas, and chlorofluorocarbons. 2. The atmosphere and the surface of the Earth absorb part of the Sun's radiation, but the remainder is reflected into space. 3. The greenhouse gases have the important function of trapping this radiation in the lower layers of the Earth's atmosphere. This process is called the greenhouse effect, without which the Earth would be as cold as the Moon. 4. It is now understood that increased concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere will increase this greenhouse effect and lead to changes in the Earth's climate. Natural events. Natural events can also cause changes in the climate. For example, volcanic eruptions or variations in ocean currents can alter the distribution of heat and precipitation. For example, El Niño. Emission of greenhouse gases. Human activities are now recognized as contributing to climate change. During recent years, scientists could collect evidence of changes in temperature, rainfall, and other weather variables. The data also demonstrates an increase in the quantity of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, CO2, 40%. Methane, CH4, 150%. Nitrous oxide, N2O, 20%. CO2 is partly produced because of human activities such as burning coal, oil and natural gas, fossil fuels, as well as agricultural activities and deforestation. CFCs and methane are also being emitted to the atmosphere because of human activities. The increase in the emission of these greenhouse gases can be attributed to the general economic growth which has taken place since the Industrial Revolution after the 1950s, as well as increased levels of consumption, including the increased demand for electricity and the use of cars. Oceans and forests can absorb CO2 and other greenhouse gases, and are therefore referred to as greenhouse gas sinks. Deforestation, however, releases previously stored greenhouse gases, thus contributing further to the increase of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere. Even if emissions from human activities were to stop immediately, the effects of the emissions already accumulated may persist for centuries. Though the temperature increase from the Industrial Revolution to the early years of the 21st century has been relatively moderate at around 0.85 degrees Celsius, scientists estimate that the global average surface temperature could rise to 4.8 degrees Celsius over the next 100 years. Impacts of global warming. A significant increase in the average world temperature will lead to serious impacts on the environment. Let's click on each loop. Increased rainfall, increased desertification, loss of the ice cover in the polar regions, rise of the sea level. In the worst scenario, the average sea level is predicted to rise by up to 0.98 meters by the end of the 21st century, posing a serious threat to low-lying delta systems and small island states. Impacts on natural vegetation and fauna. Global warming will also have impacts on natural vegetation and fauna. Seasonal patterns will change, leading to longer and hotter summers. Some species will not be able to adapt well to this change of environment and may slowly die out. The most serious consequence is likely to be the impacts on agriculture and thus food security, especially due to increased water shortage. The Climate Change Convention regime. Let's click on the gears to learn about the negotiation. 1980. International conferences on the phenomenon of global warming were first held in the 1980s. 1988. In 1988, the UN General Assembly, Resolution 43/53 of 6 December 1988, recognized that climate change is a common concern of mankind, which required urgent action by all states. 1990. In its resolution 45/212 of 21st December 1990, the UNGA decided to establish an intergovernmental negotiation process for the preparation by an intergovernmental negotiating committee of an effective framework convention on climate change, containing appropriate commitments and any related instruments as might be agreed upon. 1990. Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Around the same time, the United Nations Environmental Programme, UNEP, and the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, established and still co-sponsor an independent scientific body called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. This body consists of over 2,000 scientific and technical experts from around the world who collect scientific information about the causes of climate change, its potential effects, and possible ways to mitigate these effects. The IPCC issued its first assessment report in 1990, describing the likely threats of climate change. Subsequently, it produced the second assessment report in 1995, the third assessment report in 2001, the fourth assessment report in 2007, and the fifth assessment report in 2014. 2007. Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. In 2007, the IPCC was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, together with US Vice President Al Gore, for their efforts to build up and disseminate greater knowledge about man-made climate change and to lay the foundations for the measures that are needed to counteract such change. Principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. The negotiation process for the climate change regime has proved to be one of the most challenging in the history of multilateral environmental agreements, MEAs. Developing countries. Most developing countries have been unwilling to take on onerous commitments, arguing that it was mainly the developed countries which had contributed to the increase in global warming as part of their economic development. The states most threatened by the effects of global warming, such as small island developing states, SIDS, have argued for strong and effective commitments. Developed countries. However, several developed countries were concerned about the impact robust commitments to reduce emissions would have on their economies. Public. Despite these different positions, public concern was strong enough to motivate political leaders towards achieving an international regime to address the problem. Key to the successful negotiation and adoption of the UNFCCC was the explicit agreement on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities as the basis for action by states parties. This principle allowed commitments to be fixed according to the socio-economic status of each country, with the result that, at present, only developed countries and countries with economies in transition have specific obligations to achieve quantified emission reductions under the UNFCCC framework. These countries are listed in Annex 1 of the 1992 UNFCCC and are referred to as Annex 1 parties. In contrast, developing countries can adopt and implement policies and measures to mitigate and to adapt to climate change. All states parties to the Convention are obliged to develop national programs to generally mitigate the causes and effects of climate change.